There's one more thing that has been a part of these games is usually since we see when play a lot of ODI, and I think T20 is probably the more preferred format, where the individual innings are really short, and it is more about just mostly it's more about uh, getting the getting the hit and just trying to move on. But then you see the kind of innings that Heather Knight played in the Ashes Test, or Cap played against England, or in the same game there was Nat Sever and Alice Davison Richards as well. So it kind of makes up a really good point for how, despite seeing them in a shorter format, you see them in this longer format without a lot of practice, and yet they are very technically proficient to play these long innings, especially with Cap, because uh, her innings came in a time where her team was struggling really badly, and Kate Cross, and I think it was Easy Wong who had probably taken down the whole South African top order. So I think it speaks really good of the technical capabilities of these batters, doesn't it?
Let's move on to the Ashes Test match. So,
Sure.
as we mentioned, this one was in Canberra, and part of the Ashes. Because again, like most of these matches were played as part of a multi-format series. In this case, this was part of the Ashes, and it ends up going right down to the wire as England hang on by 1 wicket on the final day, while also being 12 runs short of chasing down their target.
And the best part about it was the last 2 overs, I guess, where Kate Cross scored a single run and blocked out like 10 or 11 dot balls to save the game for her team. But yeah, I think that was the test that I don't think it had any rain interruptions, did it?
I don't believe so.
It did not have any rain interruptions, and as you could see, it was going towards the result. I mean, even before England collapsed, it looked like they would chase down the target rather easily. But what we saw after that, the whole collapse, and then Sophia Custon and Kate Cross basically trying to save the game for the team, and this is basically what we were demanding. And I think this is one of those tests where we got what we wanted, didn't it?
Yeah, this was a game that had pretty much everything. You had some great innings, like especially the one from Heather Knight. You had some good bowling attacks, some solid spells, and then you had a lot of drama going right down to the end of the game as England initially played out a little for the draw, but then they really picked up the pace. But then they had a massive collapse and almost lost the match despite having the game completely within their hands. And in the end, they had to settle for a draw.
The funniest part of it was, even after all these technically proficient guys, batters like Rachel Haynes or even Heather Knight, it was someone like Sophia Dunkley who made the match more interesting, because it was her innings of, I think, 45 of 32 that actually set England on the course for the victory. And it seemed like, you know, this is the kind of game that is more suited to modern style of tests, isn't it? I mean, yes, there's guys who play the traditional way, take their time and score runs, but ultimately you will need someone like that to force a result, don't you? And we have seen Sophia Dunkley do well against India in the first test, and here again she was the one who started with the bat, and I mean, ultimately this is what you have to do for the results, because mm, test match is ultimately a slow style of, it's a format that usually moves slowly, but you need someone to speed the game up, and that's what Sophia Dunkley did, didn't she?
She really turbocharged that race to win the match because England were behind in the series at this point, the multi-format series, and really needed a win here. and they almost got there. But then once Dunkley got out, actually once Cyber got out before her, and then Dunkley followed her right after. Uh, England completely lost control of the match, and then again, like they almost lost this game, a game that they had completely in the palm of their hands to win, and then in the end they had to settle for a very very close draw.
If you look at both teams and their first innings, it looked like the game went back and forth multiple times, because you saw how Australia had a bad start early on. Then there was Lanning and Haynes kind of resurrecting the innings. There was Talia McGrath and Ashley Gardner doing really well. And then there was England, who had their own collapse. And then there was that ninth wicket stand and 10th wicket stand that got them, almost got them to parity. And then the whole last day happened, where there were what, like 10 or 15 wickets fell on the last day. I think Australia also lost quite a few wickets on that day. And I mean, that is the kind of game we wanted from the earlier ones, didn't we? Because even if a lot of these players are relatively traditional, there's also folks like Gardner who could go, go run a ball, or even there's young pacers like Sutherland who could, do what she did in this game. I think she got 5 wickets overall, three in the second innings, two in the first innings, and she was the one who, brought the test to the point where it was almost won by Australia. So I guess youngsters are the biggest part of this game, aren't they? I think we can move on to the fourth test, which was probably the shortest of these four, but actually it had of some of the best performances, I guess. I mean, there were 300s in it. There was also some really good bowling, and I think even though the other tests went on longer and this one did not get a lot of time, but it still had a lot of memorable things, especially that net saver innings, or that first bowling spell from England Pacers. I think it was something very, something remarkable to see, these young bowlers bowling with the new red ball. And I think it was Kate Cross and Izzy Wong who pulled the first spell, and it was pretty memorable to see, all these very traditional style of dismissals.
Yes, so we're moving to Taunton for England versus South Africa in June of this year. This is South Africa's first Test match since they played India in 2014. And once again, has some of the same problems we talked about earlier. This was played at Taunton, a non traditional international ground, although it does host a lot of domestic cricket. It was, rain affected the match, and it also ended up just running out of time because there just wasn't enough time to get a result done.
The whole issue with a 4-day game is if you lose a session or two, you're already kind of on course for the draw. And this was probably that kind of test, because once I think the rain interrupted on day three, I think, and then you more or less knew, because there were still almost two complete innings to go, and looked like we won't get a result. And that's what happened, because on the fourth day we got what, one session or a little more than one session, and ultimately it ended up being a draw. So I mean, we have already talked about it, if there's any possible measure to cut out these draws or maybe make the games more interesting. But again, I mean, what I mean, let's. I mean, if I put you in, put you in kind of a spot and ask you if there's anything that could have been done here, then is there anything that you can even think of that could have, made it a little more interesting, or could there be any way to have these games not be a draw almost instantly when a session is washed out?
Well, the idea is that they bowl more overs, but and while the overrate in women's cricket is generally quicker than it is in men's, it's not significantly enough to be able to get the goal of 100, 110 overs in, especially if a session gets washed out, because not only because if rain comes, not only do you lose a full session, you also probably lose some time at night because it'll be cloudy and the conditions won't be as bright, so you'll end up getting off the field early. And yeah, like it's again, like we talked about this earlier, it's difficult because if you have shorter matches, more of them will probably end up in draws. But if you force every match to be longer, you'll probably get fewer matches because it just becomes too expensive for most nations to justify the costs. So again, like I would be wary of forcing all matches to be 5 days because we need everything to be perfect. That's the only way you get a perfect match. No, I don't think that's what you should be doing. But I do, but yeah, it is a problem where if you get even some rain, then it becomes very difficult to finish a match within 4 days, especially on more sluggish and tired pitches, which don't give as much help to the bowlers throughout the game.
One big issue with specifically these teams is that both South Africa and England do not have a lot of spinners. I mean, if you look at teams like India or Australia who have three or four, regular spinners, then obviously the game would move at a faster pace in general. But with South Africa, you had someone like Sune Loose who she does not bowl that often. There's Laba who was the main spinner in this game, and she bowled 22 overs. But Sune Loose she bowled like what 10 overs. And on the other hand, then you have Sophie Eccleston, who is basically the lone spinner for England because everyone else there's I think Emma Lamb who bowled a few, but again she's a part timer, so you can't really count a lot on her, or even Heather Knight who sometimes bowls part time off spin. So there isn't a really viable way around it because again I mean, if the teams do not have that kind of player, you cannot really force them to play someone that they do not want to in a certain situation. So, does it bring up, you know, then does that benefit teams like India or Australia? Because then there's the whole thing about, pitches in India supporting spinners, and basically that opens up, kind of a discussion where obviously India will have a much better chance of hosting the games and a much better chance of getting the results as well.
Yeah, like it helps, but again, like I'd be wary of saying it never rains in India during cricket matches. It never rains in Australia during cricket matches. It does, and it happened. And if you keep forcing the narrative that it only ever rains in England, so don't play games in England, then you're sort of left a little. It looks a little silly when it rains somewhere else and ruins this game in the same way that it would have in England. Again, like India has a major advantage for hosting cricket matches in the fact that they have so many grounds all over the country that are reasonably well maintained. Like I know the spectator experience isn't always amazing, but the grounds themselves they're there, and a lot of them are willing to host matches because isn't a lot of opportunity for them to host India matches. Uh, and yeah, assisting spin to make the over rate go faster also helps a lot. But yeah, like you need to be again, like you just need to be wary of forcing down one way to do women's test cricket into the game because if you make it so that only this can only happen in one way, then you really risk damaging the sport by it not being by being too homogenous and being too predictable.
Obviously, now that you have brought up that point, I mean, if you put it the other way and you have pitches that are probably greener or have a lot of movement of the pitch, then I think the players are just that skilled that they would ultimately counter that. I think there's a lot of players in women's cricket who play seam or swing better than the men's cricketers do, and it has shown in these games itself because there was in the Taunton game there was actually a lot of movement for the Pacers, and yet there were multiple hundreds scored. So does it look like then, as I said, you cannot push a single narrative? Then does that kind of doom the whole result finding process? Because then I don't think you really have a way to consistently get games that end up with one team winning or one team losing.
Most first class matches are 4 days, and most of them do get results. So I don't see why women's Test cricket would not be able to get results consistently. The issue is just that you end up, if you play 2 tests a year, and some of these teams play a test once every 7 years. That's how long it took for South Africa to play a test match again. That's how long it took for India to play a test match again. Most of these teams come into these matches under a lot of pressure to perform, to not lose. So that encourages them to play it more slowly. And if you're unlucky enough to get rain, it makes it harder to get a result. Like there's a lot of underlying factors to make sure that the last 7 test matches, the last 6 women's test matches have all been draws. And it's not just because of the way test cricket is structured, because you have a lot of cricket that's structured this way and they still consistently get results. It's just that, for women's cricket, if you play them on tired pitches, if the women are not playing much first class cricket outside of test cricket, if you treat every match as this match will define the future of women's test cricket, they better put on a great show, otherwise it threatens the future of women's test cricket, then you're never going to get anywhere. You need to, the only way for women's test cricket to get better, I feel, is for them to just play more of it, to make it a more accepted thing, and then players can start playing with a little less pressure. Administrators can prepare these games with a little less pressure. If they have more fun with it, then you'll see a lot more fun coming out of it and make it a more fun experience to watch. And I think that about covers it for today. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.